we'll go ahead and get started. I guess the first step is to say that we introduced last year a full line of mason bee equipment, and we've gotten excellent feedback from our customers. So I wanted to take the opportunity to dive a little bit deeper into mason bees, and hopefully you'll gain an understanding of what they are and how they can benefit you. Because ultimately right now is the mason bee season. So if you're looking to get started, now is the time. Okay. So let's just take a step back and just look at solitary bees as a whole. There are more than 3,500 species of solitary bees. Actually, it's more like 4,000, but these are all native to the Americas. You've got a range of bumblebees, mason bees, carpenters, leafcutters, mining bees, just a full range of different bees that are solitary. And the good portion of these are actually better pollinators than honeybees when comparing bee to bee. Now granted, honeybees beat them by far just by the sheer force of numbers, but broken down, these solitary bees are better pollinators. The other nice thing is they're non-aggressive, so they're safe around children and pets. So when you actually do compare them to honeybees, solitary bees, they do not live in a colony. They do not produce honey. They do not produce wax to construct cells. They don't have a queen. They don't have a pollen basket. Now, granted, they do collect pollen, but they don't have a pollen basket. They do not swarm, and they do not care for their young. Now, this is in the sense that they remain to feed and nurture the young. They do provide the resources so that the young, the developing larva, has the resources to develop and emerge come next spring. And this over here, the right image is some lavender, and that's a bumblebee. And the bottom left image, that's an actual mason bee. And this image right here is a female mason bee. And mason bees, as well as leafcutter bees, they are part of the Megachilidae family. And their appearance varies. You know, there's probably 250 different subspecies of the mason bee. You've got, I guess the family is the Osmia family. But for the Megachilidae family, commonly known as mason bees or leafcutter bees, these are bees that nest in existing holes. They do not bore their own holes. Their name actually reflects the material used in building. So, you know, looking back at mason bees, masonry, so they use mud to develop their nest. Leaf cutters, leaves. And so if you look at the bee, look at the abdomen, and right below the abdomen you see some pollen. So the pollen is carried on the scopa. That's the underside of the abdomen. So they don't have the pollen baskets like honeybees do, but they do carry pollen down there. So going into orchard bees specifically. So orchard mason bees are divided into two subspecies, Osmia lignaria and Osmia lignaria propinqua. The lignaria is specific to the East Coast. Propinqua are geared towards the West Coast. And if you do establish outside of the native range, you know, bring in the Propinqua over to the East Coast or lignaria to the west, there's a range of mixed results. That's not to say that it's not done, but the survival is mixed, so it's better to keep them in their native range. And then as far as the native range goes, once you go far enough down south, the temperatures, the overwintering temperatures are not cold enough for the larva to fully develop. So if you go down into the Florida and the Gulf Coast, the survival rate lessens. They just don't have the winter temperatures to fully develop. So looking at the female versus the male, the female bees are actually a little bit longer. They're 14 millimeter in length. Both male and female are metallic appearance, and they range from a bluish gray to black, sometimes have the appearance of green. They are covered in hair. The male bees are distinct in the fact that the front of their heads has a clump of pale hairs. So if you can't distinguish them by length, you can distinguish them by that, as well as the antennas. The female antennas aren't quite as long. The females have 12 segments. The male has 13 segments, so they're a little bit longer antennas as well. So going into the biology of a nest, if you look at the chart up top, you've got the cells all filled with the larva, and then it jumps into the empty cells. So this is after the cocoons have emerged. The males will emerge first, then the females will emerge. So the females are back here in these cavities, the males are up front. And you'll notice up here that first chamber is empty. So the reasoning behind that is over the development process of the mason bees and all the pests that are out there, the females will actually leave that first cavity or chamber or cell, whatever you want to call it, empty as a safety mechanism to ensure that that next generation is coming out. Because you'll have birds that will come by and peck in there and pull out the cocoons. You'll have wasps that will drill in there and lay their eggs, and other pests. We'll get into specific ones later on. But that first chamber is usually empty. And then the sequential chambers after that are the males, and then ends up with the females. So the chamber itself, the tubing itself is roughly 6 millimeters in diameter, and mason bees will use a full range of different holes for their nesting ground. So they can use natural reeds, holes in wood that's pre-drilled by other insects, paper tubes, pipes, hoses. If you look in the image, that's what we reference to as our cartridge. So it's all these different layers of wood that has the holes drilled into them. And so the females will utilize 7 to 11 holes to develop their nest. So 7 to 11 of these holes in this cartridge down here would be utilized by one female. The female will line the rear wall with mud and then deposit that first egg. And then the egg is given room for pollen and for full-out development so that they can go from the egg to the larva to the cocoon stage. So going into early spring, the life cycle of the mason bee. Now, let's take another step back. This is for mason bees that have been overwintered. If you're just starting out, you'll get a cardboard box of cocoons that you can see in the attic of this house right here. That's the cardboard box with the hole punched into it. So that's what you would receive at the very beginning, and it's a 4 to 6 ratio of females to males. So 4 females to every 6 males. And then once daytime temperatures get approximately above 50 degrees Fahrenheit, the adult males will emerge, whether it be in the box or from the nest itself. They will be the first to emerge. So whether you're starting off or you're overwintered, don't assume that all of your cocoons have emerged at the very beginning, because your males will emerge 2 weeks before the females. They'll usually be hanging around the front entrance, so you can kind of gauge what are the females and what are the males. The males will be out there up front waiting for those females to emerge, and once the females emerge, the males will fertilize multiple females and then die shortly after mating. But I just wanted to make a quick note, because last year we had a lot of customers who opened up their cocoons and saw that some had hatched, some hadn't, and they assumed that they had bad cocoons. That's not the case. Males emerge 2 weeks before the females, so hold on to your cocoons. So continuing on, you've got the males that emerge. They've mated with the females. Now your females are mated, and your orchard is in bloom. So your females are off collecting the resources they need to build their nest. So for every egg that's deposited, they will one female will take 12 to 25 flights in order to gather the pollen and the nectar that is needed to feed that one egg. And the ratio for that feed is roughly 65% pollen and 35% nectar. It's a ball that you can see the orangish yellow section up here. That would be the pollen, and then the egg is deposited on top of that. And it's 1 egg per chamber. In between each chamber, she sections it off with mud. So mud's not only to enclose the rear of it, but it's to section off each individual chamber. The female does have a flight radius of only 100 yards, so when setting up your mason bee house, take that into full consideration. So with orchards, if you've got apple trees, pear trees, cherry trees, whatever it is out there, take into consideration that your mason bee house should be within 100 yards of that orchard. And then so the female will continue on laying eggs, depositing eggs. She can do approximately 2 to 3 per day, and she'll continue on for 4 to 6 weeks. Ultimately, she'll end up laying 34 eggs within those 7 to 11 cells. The nice thing about mason bees are, they're gregarious, so they're not completely solitary. They're still social creatures, so you'll actually find a full nest, a full cartridge completely filled, because multiple females will use that nesting ground to deposit their eggs and develop their nest. And actually, they like to congregate because mason bees have a keen sense of smell. So once those bees emerge, the likelihood of them coming back is great because of that, the smell of those originating cocoons. So once the eggs are deposited, your queen's had her 4 to 6 weeks to fully fill up all of the holes that she potentially can. So you've got the eggs. Start off, it's actually, they're very similar in size and color to the honeybee, so I like to reference them as a grain of rice. So those are the eggs. You can see here, middle, top of the chart. So the eggs, they begin consuming the resources. They start developing into the larvae. Larvae are white in color. They continue feeding on that pollen ball. And once they get to the pupa state, they begin to spin the cocoon and begin the metamorphosis to the adult. And then they'll actually overwinter as the adult. And you can see here from this image, the bees usually keep it in a straight line. They're not all sporadic all over the place as far as the tubes that they use to deposit their eggs. So going into winter. So winter is a little bit, it's not tricky, but you've got 2 options. you can leave the cocoons completely alone in the nesting block and not even worry about them. The potential risk there is, as the bees travel from flower to flower, they can pick up pollen mites. And once the bees pick up pollen mites, they're dispersed in the pollen up here, and they'll actually consume the resources and can even consume the egg as well, damaging it. So you have the worry of pollen mites and just the overall cleanliness of the cocoons. That's one other thing to consider. So a lot of people who oversee mason bees, they'll actually harvest the cocoons and clean them for winter storage. So you can use sand, just some light loose sand, and just kind of sift the cocoons around in that. That's a good process. Or you can use a bleach solution. Take an old toothbrush and mix bleach with water. It's about 1 gallon of water to 1 cup of bleach. You want to dilute it down so you're not impacting the cocoons. And you leave it in there for about 1 to 3 minutes, scrubbing it, sloshing it around, and then using a strainer, remove it from that bleach solution. And then once you actually have harvested the cocoons, you do want to store them in a cold place. So for us at Brushy Mountain, we store all of our cocoons in a refrigerator. Storing them in a refrigerator, you do have to worry about moisture. You don't want them to be too dry because the cocoon will dry out, and you don't want them to be too moist because then you have to worry about mold and bacteria at that point. So you have to find that medium solution for moisture, and keeping them in a cool place, cool, dark place, helps in that full-out developmental process. So why mason bees? You know, that's the ultimate question. You know, you've got honeybees out there, they're excellent pollinators. You've got other solitary bees out there that are pollinators. Why mason bees? Looking at pollination in specific, it is estimated that 250 to 300 female bees can pollinate an entire acre of orchard trees, apple trees, pear trees, cherry trees, whatever it is. That, if you look at that in honeybee terms, you're looking at 2 honeybee colonies per acre. So the amount of bees that are required per acre is less just because of their pollination services. And the second thing is their management. They are extremely easy to manage. There's no hive inspections needed. They're not aggressive. They'll actually work in cool or rainy weather, and they'll actually emerge and begin pollinating well before honeybees will. So the almond crops out in California, apple orchards, cherry, peach, all these commercial growers, farmers, are looking towards these solitary bees just for their pollination and the lack of, or the easy management practice behind them. Breaking it down further, going into that commercial side of it, mentioned before that 25 individual foraging trips per 1 egg, and each time that female goes out, she's hitting a minimum of 75 blossoms. So if you look at my calculation, and I apologize if it was wrong, but 25, 75, and then 34 eggs throughout the season, she's hitting 63,000 blossoms, pollinating those blossoms that are potential apples or whatever the fruit is. So the pollination, they're definitely superior pollinators, mainly because their focus is pollen. That's one of the main resources that they use in that next generation. So they supply all the pollen that next generation needs. And then if you look, or if you think back, and I can actually scroll back if anybody wants me to, but the underside of the abdomen where the that female bee had pollen. It wasn't nice and neat and pretty. So whenever they go to that flower to collect pollen, they're very energetic, they're vigorous, they're grabbing all that they can, and they're losing a lot as well. So that's why mainly it takes roughly 25 foraging trips, because they're losing a lot as well as the plant gaining a lot. So let's go briefly into the management practice here. You can go as simple as you want or as extravagant as you want. Basically, as mentioned before, it's a 6-millimeter diameter for their hole. So if you wanted to take a wooden block out there and drill in holes, you have that opportunity, and then you can begin your nest. Now, it's not practical, and you can see here that these two mason bee houses have an overhang. So if you just drill into a block of wood, you're not going to have sufficient coverage to protect it against rain or direct sunlight. And with it being just a front face right there, it doesn't offer protection against those pests as well. So, build your own house. The left-hand house is our do-it-yourself, or again, you can go extravagant and get the copper roof house. This one has the little attic window that you can put your box of cocoons in there, and it makes a nice yard ornament almost. And then looking at the nesting material, I show here what we call our cartridge. You can use cardboard tubes and straws, or you can bundle up some reeds and put it in there. So you can go as expensive as you would like or as cheap as you would like. Just make sure that when you do supply the nesting materials, that it's at least 5/16 inch in diameter and at least 6 inches in length. And you can see here on the cartridge, the holes are actually offset. This helps just segregate out how the female bee lays her cocoon, so she can lay in a straight line rather than diagonals and mismatching all over the place. And then it helps when they do, you have multiple females using one nesting block. It helps with that. And then with the nesting block, ours is actually supplied with a cardboard backing. The female will still go in there and deposit some mud to block off that back entrance so pests aren't coming around and coming in the back entrance, but just something to consider. So other resources to consider, ultimately, if the resources aren't there, the mason bee has no reason to stay. So they're going to go where the resources are. So look at your setup. If you have it next to your house, but your first flowering blooms are 200 yards away, those bees are going to go out to those blooms and look for a nesting ground in that relative area. They're not going to be coming back to your house to continue on that next generation in that nesting block. So, consider their flight radius as being 300 feet. So there needs to be a pollen source. And also consider the blooming cycle. Right now, here in North Carolina, most of our peaches and apples are already in bloom just based off of the temperatures that we've been experiencing. So look at that, look at the blooming that's in your area and take all that into consideration. Going down, mud. Yes, they do need mud. Also take into consideration that limited flight path. Also, their limited time. A female bee has 4 to 6 weeks. She's mainly focused on the resources, gathering the resources, the pollen and nectar. Have those additional resources like the mud readily available so that she can fully utilize her time and work efficiently. And then, look at the cold winters. There's been such a huge fluctuation from west coast to east coast to south to north. Warmer winters will encourage early blooming. Like as mentioned, we're already seeing apple trees and peach trees in full bloom. That late frost can hurt those blooms and, in essence, hurt the mason bees. So that next generation are going to be malnourished bees. So you might want to look at the weather patterns, and rather than release or putting out your bees in February, wait until end of March to put out your bees and hopefully capture some of these late blooms. So there are pests. Mason bees don't experience the diseases and mites that plague the honeybees, but they do have their own pests. Pollen mites. As the female bees going from flower to flower, even going down the line of her own tube, she's transmitting these pollen mites to the pollen. And it's nothing that you can necessarily treat for, but it's something that you should be aware of. Definitely cleaning out your cartridges, your tubes every year, cleaning off your cocoons, making sure that your nesting ground is clean is one treatment method for the pollen mites. And it is suggested that not only do they consume the pollen, but they do damage the eggs. They'll actually open up the eggs and suck out the juices, if you want to imagine that. And then you have parasitic wasps. They'll actually fly around if you're using the cardboard tubes or even the wooden blocks. They'll pierce the nesting tubes, deposit their eggs with the mason bee eggs, and then the wasp larva consumes the other occupant. Spiders will put up their webbing wherever they'll get the most gain from, and if mason bees are flying back and forth, knock down the spider webs that are in front of the mason bee nesting ground. Mice, having it off the ground is something that helps with mice. Birds, having it back far enough and that covered shelter will prevent birds from poking in and pulling out the cocoons. And again, the bees take their own precautionary step, and they leave that first cell open so that whenever a wasp comes in or a bird pokes in, they won't find that first cocoon. They'll assume that full line is completely empty and move along. Well, that's the intended outcome. So it was short and sweet, but I hope you gained a little bit of knowledge from it all. And like I said, now is the opportune time. So look at what's going on in your area. Look at the blooming cycles of different blooms within your area, and consider mason bees. They're easy management. They're great pollinators, and you're continuing on the pollination generation. And just to give a quick breakdown, we do offer a full line. You do have your cartridges, your mason bee house, and then this image up here in front is what we actually provide our customers to overwinter their mason bees in. So you've got a plastic container with a felt pad, and then what looks like a black foam material, and then a cardboard box. That's something that you can use to store your mason bees with. Then we have all the literature. The Orchard Mason Bee is an excellent book with a lot more information than what I've provided here. So at this current point in time, I'd just like to open it up for questions. Please post your questions, and I'll answer to the best of my ability. So first question here, how long does it take for bees to emerge from cocoons once the cocoons are actually put out? It's really dependent upon your weather. So as mentioned, once those daytime temperatures start hitting 50 degrees and you get multiple days hitting 50 degrees, that's when those bees will begin emerging. If you get one day that's 50 degrees and then the next are down into the 40s and 30s, they're going to take a step back and not emerge. Is there a reason, sorry, the next question is there a reason the cartridge appears charred? That's just the manufacturing process. We actually get these cartridges in from a separate supplier. We don't make them in-house, and that's how they are brought in. There is no damage to the wood. There's no scent to the charred wood. It's just aesthetic reasoning. So the next question, is a mud dauber the same as a mason bee? No, mud daubers are not the same as a mason bee. Mason bees, again, they use cavities to build their nest. Mud daubers actually, I guess, build around a particular item or use grooves to begin building their nest. They don't use cavities. So the next question, how many days at 50 degrees will it take for them to emerge? The ultimate answer is bees are bees. They'll do what they want to do. We've seen them emerge after 3 days of 50-degree temperature. We've seen them emerge after 2 weeks of 50-degree temperature. It's really hard to say. They have to go through that full-out development cycle before they emerge. And going back to the males versus the females, males develop quicker than the females, so they emerge faster. The next question is, so we actually would plug the cocoons back into the holes in spring. No, there's no necessity to do that. If you actually put them in that cardboard box that I mentioned earlier, we put them into a cardboard box and poke a hole into that cardboard box, and the bees will emerge from there. There's no need to go back and put them into the cartridge or the tubes. Even though they do not produce honey, will mason bees go into honeybee hives for any reason? No, they will not. So they have no need for the resources mason or honeybees are collecting. So honeybees are collecting the nectar to produce honey, to use it for wax. Mason bees' main goal is pollen. So they don't need the honey, they don't need the wax, so there's no need for mason bees to go into honeybee hives. And if you actually look at an apple tree, you have hundreds of flowers on there. You'll actually see mason bees and honeybees and other bees hitting the same flowers. So there's no, I guess, there's no conflict when they're out in the open either. So the next question is, will they gather pollen from garden flowers as well as orchard flowers? It's really dependent upon that blooming cycle. So if you have garden flowers that are in bloom during this time of year, then yes. Well, orchard mason bees, you know, they're geared more towards the apple trees, the pear trees, peach trees, all that, but they do hit flowering bushes as well as other flowering plants. But the main objective is the orchard crop. So would mason bees and honeybees compete for same foraging resources? They don't necessarily compete. They do utilize the same resources, but they won't compete, and they won't. There's no conflict there either. So after the 4 to 6 week period for the females to be out and about, will the holes be filled up and wait until the next season? So after the 4 to 6 weeks, all the holes that she will use will be plugged and filled. You don't want to remove the, or the, at that point they're just eggs or maybe potentially larvae. You don't want to go in and look at removing. You want to wait until roughly around October or November to go back in, open up the cartridge, and begin removing the cocoons out. And again, I mean, that's really based off of the temperate climate here in North Carolina. If you're further up north, you may want to open it up a little bit earlier, or just look in your region. When temperatures start to drop, start to get cooled down, at that point you can go in, remove the cocoons, clean them off, and then store them in your refrigerator. So this person has blue orchard bees and horn-faced bees. As far as an opinion about the horn-faced bees, really, as the Osmia species has multiple different subspecies out there. So you really need to look at the benefits from each one, and a lot of them are the same. But just as far as your local area, your environment, all the resources that you have, what's going to better suit those bees. Okay, so the next question is, I'm assuming that this person is referencing to these copper mason bee houses. So the houses are sold individually, or we offer them as a kit, and within the kit comes with the cocoons. You can put out the houses with the cartridges, and we even offer what we call our scented reeds. And these reeds are scented with essential oils to mimic the mason bee nesting ground. But putting these out aren't necessarily a guarantee that you'll attract mason bees. Your better option is to take the time, go out, look at your trees or flowering plants around you, and see what native bees are out there. Because if you don't have any native bees, you're not going to gain anything by just putting out a house. You would gain more by looking at it, seeing if you have them or not, and then actually investing time and the resources into getting the mason bees and beginning from there. These items are on our online store and in our current catalog. The plastic container is not in our catalog or online store. The plastic container is provided with each purchase of cocoons. So you would not find that. So the next question is, why is there a small house and a large house? As mentioned, depending on your land, your orchard out there, or your flowering plants, is really dependent upon how many mason bees that you truly need. You know, up to 300 mason bees female mason bees per acre for a full acre of apple trees is what you would need. And going back to that 4 to 6 ratio, so you get 4 females for every 6 males. So just imagine, every female that you would need, she's going to be using 7 to 11 of these holes. So try to calculate out how many cartridges you'll need, how many houses you'll need, and how many cocoons you will truly need in the end. So the next question is, do you have any suggestions for enticing local mason bees to your bee house instead of buying cocoons? It really steps into those scented reeds. As mentioned, mason bees have a keen sense of smell, and they're attracted to nesting grounds where cocoons have emerged. And so these scented reeds mimic that. And if you really want to try to draw in the mason bees natural to your area, that would be your best opportunity. Again, take the time to go out to see if there are those bees out there. Don't just assume and put the reeds in there and hope for the best. So then the next question is, last year we were surprised to find leafcutter bees in our cartridge. Is this common? Yeah, it's very common. Like I mentioned, I guess the whole Megacholidae family are gregarious in the sense that they'll use one nesting block, nesting ground, and you'll have multiple females using the holes. So you'll find leaf cutters along with mason bees. So that's very common. So the next question is, are they active during a particular time of day? Again, mason bees will actually work in cooler weather than honeybees. So they'll come out of the holes quicker than honeybees will exit from the hive. So really, they'll begin at dusk or at dawn and work all the way up till dusk just to fill those holes. Now, if the bees have emerged and you have a cold snap, you'll actually, and for anybody that's had mason bees, you can actually go by the cartridge and you can see their tail end sticking out. And you'll see that at night as well. So colder temperatures that dip well down below the 50s and 40s, mason bees can handle that for a certain period of time. They won't be able to handle it for weeks upon end just because they aren't able to gather the resources that they need. But you'll actually find their tail end sticking out. So in reference to carpenter bees, I've never found them aggressive. I don't know any particular instance where they've necessarily attacked somebody. But looking back at mason bees, it's mentioned that they are non-aggressive, but at a certain point, they will fight back. So, if they see immediate danger, at that point they can sting you. Now, they don't have the barbs or the poisonous venom, but it does pack a punch. Again, this webinar is recorded. I do appreciate everybody attending and taking the time to ask all these great questions. If you do have any further questions, please don't hesitate to email in info@BrushyMtnBeeFarm.com. We will be more than happy to help answer those questions. And again, as mentioned, this is the time. This is your opportune time to begin your mason bee nest. Thank you, everybody, and I hope everybody has a wonderful night. Bye.